Good morning. I'm Leslie Harris, the president of the Center for Democracy and Technology in Washington, and I am your moderator today, the chairperson for this panel on the app, what are we calling this? The apps revolution, perhaps, is Elizabeth Denham, who many of you know, who is the Information and Privacy Commissioner in British Columbia, and previously served as the Deputy Privacy Commissioner for Canada. Elizabeth, if you can make opening remarks, then I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel. And just a few ground rules. Nobody on this panel is giving introductory remarks except Elizabeth. I'm going to throw out a question to a person, but I expect everybody on the panel to participate. We're going to do this U.S. brawl style to the extent possible, because we got to keep people awake until lunch. So Elizabeth, please.
Thank you, Leslie. Is this on? Can you hear me? I think Canadians are too polite for the U.S. brawl style, but we'll see how this turns out. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to the session. Privacy challenges and opportunities in the new app economy. Kind of an interesting title, but I think a better title might be Privacy and Security. Is there an app for that?
Absolutely.
Okay, somebody got it.
I got it.
Some of you may have known me in my former role as Assistant Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and in that role, I think especially Tim and I got to know each other, and Moselle and I got to know each other quite well when Jennifer Stoddard's office investigated a comprehensive complaint into Facebook. And in that investigation, I had the opportunity to encounter firsthand the very dynamic ecosystem of platforms and apps. So with the many players, and oh, there they are, with the many players and the complex data flows. The amazing thing is that analysts estimate the app economy to be worth $1 billion today. And it's estimated that this economy will be worth $15 billion in 2015. I don't think nobody really knows for sure. But think about it. 2 years ago, it didn't exist. So that's a stunning statistic. So I am delighted to chair the panel today. I think the chairman's role is a light role because Leslie's going to do all the work. But we are going to be discussing the immediate challenges and opportunities that we face as industry players, as regulators, as individuals, and as civil society in a world where applications, particularly through mobile devices, are really permeating our culture. So what do we mean by the app economy? And, you know, I talk to my kids about this, and they say, it's just all about games. But no one should really shrug off the seemingly kooky world of apps. Applications are bite-sized pieces of software that people load onto their mobile phones or tap into the web. Apps are a lot less about searching, and they're a lot more about instant access, which is what individuals want. And one of the major shifts in the digital world has been the shift to mobile computing, based on the iPhone model of mobile computing. Individuals are increasingly choosing dedicated platforms instead of the World Wide Web because the screen comes to them. They don't have to go to the screen. While games are certainly the most apps that are downloaded today, we do see common trends across all smartphone platforms. Users are choosing social tools and practical applications. Facebook, Google Maps, and the Weather Channel are the most commonly found applications downloaded in the United States. But there is a world beyond mafia wars and Farmville. There are also some very serious business tools among the thousands of new applications. So business productivity tools, so that executive managers can actually run their customer relationships from their mobile devices. So what about the mobile phone and app market? It's not going to be a surprise to anyone that there's quite a large variation in the adoption of mobile phone and applications across the world. Japanese folks make the most use of their mobile phone applications. So 75% of mobile phone users in Japan are downloading applications, and that compares to the US, where they're a lot more conservative with apps at 43.7, and Europeans at around 38%, Canadians a little bit more conservative than that. So what are the privacy challenges in the new app economy? And I think at this conference and at the OECD conference, we certainly heard that users and privacy advocates might be concerned by the collection of data about views, about preferences, and click habits by advertising networks, in some cases run by the platform themselves, Facebook, Android, Apple. And I think a Google mobile product manager, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly, Sumit Agarwal, put it best when he called the mobile phone the ultimate ad vehicle. He said, it's the first one ever in the history of the planet that people go to bed with. It's ubiquitous across the world, across demographics, across age groups. People are giving these things to ever younger children for safety and communication. And Google is certainly aware of the privacy implications of this most personal of electronic gadgets. He said, the same engineer said, we have to be very respectful of privacy and give users lots of control, but it can know where you've been, where you've lingered, what store you shopped in, what car dealership you visited. It goes beyond any traditional advertising. Data protection commissioners are concerned about the impact of data collection and aggregation by advertising networks, and also by the overcollection of personal information by third-party applications. They are pushing for the integration of privacy protection into platforms and into applications. And certainly the application economy raises complex questions for the best management of privacy, because platform providers and developers are really seeking global scale. They want to write once, deploy globally. And global platforms are challenged by the compliance of laws in multiple jurisdictions. I think the really interesting challenge is that many developers are, they're the guys and girls in the garage that we were talking about yesterday. They have little resources to be able to tackle complex questions. But most importantly, how can the individual know what's really going on here? How can the individual consumer, end user, how are they supposed to understand who's responsible for code and content? And how can users meaningfully participate in the app's economy to exercise choice? So there are real challenges in regulating this new ecosystem with so many players, and data protection commissioners can't be running around after rogue developers. There are no industry standards, and I think there are best practices, but I think they're going to be available to us by individual companies. I hope we'll hear about some of those today. But how do we influence, how do we regulate in this new app economy? How can developers reflect and integrate privacy precautions? And should platform providers develop standards that guarantee a common approach to privacy protection across platforms? So those are just my opening remarks. I look forward to the dialogue on the panel today. And over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel quickly, and then before we turn to questions, I want to take this down from the 10,000-foot view to the view of a single teenager in a single cafe in Paris at 10:30 in the morning. Before I do that, Stephen Dedman, directly to my left, is Vodafone's Group Privacy Officer and Head of Legal, Privacy, Security, and Content for the Privacy Group. Tim Sparapani is the Director of U.S. Public Policy for Facebook. And Miko Neva is the Global Privacy Officer for Nokia. So it's 10:30 on a school morning, but Nicole is in a cafe with her friends playing a racing game rather than at school. She has a mobile phone with an OS app store that is located here in Israel. Pardon, closer? I will. So she downloads the game application. The developer happens to be in the U.S. That happens to be hosted on servers in British Columbia. So we'll say that the developer is somewhere in Washington, state of Washington. Like lots of apps, this racing game wants access to lots of information and device capabilities, whether it technically needs them or not. And maybe this platform is built with strong protections and security, maybe not. Maybe it vets the security of apps or not. Maybe it sets guidelines that require the app to ask the user's permission for each capability, internet access, phone location, or maybe it doesn't. But our user, of course, is a teenager, and the permissions are asked up front in a long, complicated list. And she wants to play the game, so she checks OK. And the game has a really cool feature, because Nicole can share her high scores and her screenshots on a social networking site. And maybe it asks the user's permission to do this, or maybe it doesn't. So the app sends a feed about who the user is playing with and when and who won to a social networking site. And because the app also asked for access to the device's contact list, it lists the real names and maybe the contact information of all the user's friends who are playing the game with her. And of course, it also asks for location information. So where Nicole was at the cafe instead of at school when she played the game is uploaded to the social networking site, as well as that location of all of her friends. And maybe there's multiple sites where you can share what you're doing on this game. And so she also shares it on a video site. She uploads a video of where she's playing the game, etc. And meanwhile, all this information is being sent back to the app developer, who's developed a revenue stream through a deal with a behavioral ad network in Brazil that puts the ads in games, and it also serves ads on hundreds of other apps and uses the information gathered from all to develop profiles, which it sells. And all the policies of both the mobile platform and the social networking site forbid the apps to share certain personal information with the network. They do it anyway. So now Nicole's profile, that of her friends, including perhaps some who don't play the game, are also now in this mix. So now it's 11:15, and Nicole's mother checks her social networking feed and discovers that Nicole is playing a racing game, not at school. So now we know Nicole is in trouble. But I think the question for this panel is, do either Nicole or her mother really understand that the trouble is just beginning? Stephen, with our friend in mind, we're still in the early days of the apps revolution. But when we're talking about apps, what are we really talking about? It's not like we haven't had downloads for forever, and we have apps platforms for software, for social networking. We even have apps for browsers, and Facebook is a platform, and Facebook is an app. So how do we sort of scope out what we're talking about here? Because it almost feels too big to even sort of start talking about what the rules are.
Thanks, Leslie. So first of all, I'll start off with a disclaimer. I'm a lawyer, and that question contains a number of components to it, which requires perhaps a little bit of discussion about the basic components of this. I'm sure there are lots of more knowledgeable people in the room who can talk to the technical components of what the app economy consists of. And if I say anything which you think needs to be supplemented, please stick your hand up and add to what I say here. But I want to keep this quite simple. An application is a piece of software that enables a user to perform a particular purpose or set of purposes. So fundamentally, it's about the user. It's different to the.
You have to apparently push if you want to.
I don't want it just yet.
Okay, good.
That's okay.
Good.
So it's about the user, unlike the operating system or the middleware on the device that they're using that runs the system. And applications are written in a number of different environments. There are environments like native environments written for the operating system, web environments like Facebook and browsers, and they can come in open forms and closed forms. What we've seen happen in the last 4 or 5 years is the platforms upon which applications are being written becoming open. What they're doing is they're exposing their capabilities to that mass of potential innovation out there that enables people to write interesting software that people can use on their phones. And what the platform does is it gives the application developer all the tools they need to do something really innovative and exciting. In a sense, it takes away the complexity for the developer. And Nokia can speak to this much more than I can, but a few years ago, for developers writing software for different applications, it was quite an expensive and complicated task. Every operating system is different. You struggled with scale, and it was a kind of a complicated and technical job to make it compatible across lots of different devices. Once you start having platforms with open systems with millions and millions of users, you can write a single piece of software that can reach a market. And the platforms that are providing these capabilities have other things they provide, not just the technical platform, but they enable the application developer to bill or to insert advertising and to generate revenue from that advertising, or to location enable the app. And there are a range of other features that are enabled through APIs that are exposed to the application developer. The key point is that for application developers, it's getting a lot simpler. The cost and the barrier to entry has come right down to the point where I could write an app tomorrow. I could get someone to write one for me for $10 for the Android platform, for example. It's that simple. So we're seeing a fundamental change in the way that perhaps we are used to thinking about software downloads, as you referred to, Leslie, where most people using a PC generally run the software on the PC. They're not really customizing the device. And partly that's because PCs have a big fat wire sticking out the back, and you've got a browser, and it more or less does the job you need it to do. Certainly in the mobile environment, as Elizabeth referred to, you have some constraints. We have constraints of the user experience, but importantly, we have the constraint of kind of connectivity. And so my company's doing the best it can to make that connectivity as robust and as fat as possible, but there will always be that constraint. So users want to have bite-sized chunks of things that help them achieve their objectives without necessarily needing a constant connection. So as the barriers come down, we see application developers pouring in, using their innovation to reach customers. They've got a business model now that's available to them. They can start to generate revenue with relatively low degrees of technical innovation. So we're seeing an ecosystem emerge. And that ecosystem consists of all the different players, not just the application developers, but the platforms, the devices, the networks, and the suppliers of the underlying technology, creating a complex web of relationships. Does that answer your question, Leslie?
It does answer my question, but I think what I want to sort of push a little bit more on, maybe Miko, you can start this conversation, is we've spent, so maybe we have 15 years of knowledge of sort of the privacy challenges and some of the responses on the web, and now we're moving to mobile. I mean, do we have any of the learning that we've sort of collectively amassed over the last 15 years? How well does that map when we move over not just to apps but to the mobile environment?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, and we heard yesterday, or was it actually today, Jules saying that we shouldn't necessarily take the learnings from the PC-based privacy experience. Because, as we have also heard by many speakers, there's some failures in that area. But I think those are still learnings. So of course we need to take them with us. Sometimes I explain it to myself that mobile privacy is basically nothing new. In principle, there are new dimensions to it, but of course there's an element of bringing the existing privacy innovation, taking the learnings from the traditional innovation there, making it better, of course, and adapting it to this new environment. And the characteristics of this new environment basically is that it's, you're basically always on. The connectivity is no longer that big of a problem and it's always with you. And these mobile devices are very powerful sensory devices. So
But then it also means that your apps seem to always be on. I mean, unless you're using something to kill your apps, right?
yeah, of course. Of course, the whatever you run in the device is on if you have so set, or who knows, bad applications may be on even if you thought they were not on. That's one of the challenges.
The way my Droid drains the battery, I'm told that my apps are always on. But
yeah, but so if we want to start mapping the threats. There are some learnings from traditional industry, definitely, and I think security is the place that I turn my head. What's the culture that they have developed, and it's based on identifying certain principles. They're fairly simple principles that everybody agrees to. These principles are like the control objectives. What do you want to protect against? And then you map those principles, your objectives, against the technologies and the services that you are dealing with, and you identify, what's in those technologies that causes a threat against your objectives, and then you identify countermeasures to deal with those threats to the, best
so
available.
Are you talking about platform security, device operating system
this
security?
is still on a fairly high level at this point.
Yeah.
So this introduction means that in order to start addressing the app economy, we have to first get really good understanding what the threats are.
Right.
What are the principles that we need to apply into this ecosystem. I don't think we have a common understanding on that yet. There's a lot of good work. Of course, the OECD principles are the basis for this work. But privacy is contextual. It doesn't help if you just start applying the OECD principles to app economy. You have to think about it in the context of app economy, and there you need to understand the full variety of different roles that different parties play, how the regulation applies to them. We know that there's some, it's not ideal at least, the regulation, but maybe we'll address that later on.
In just a minute,
Yeah.
yes. In just a minute. Let me go to Tim. I guess what I'm trying to sort out, and I'm sure, Elizabeth, you've got something to say on this as well, but how does the app economy, a lot of how we think about privacy is enabling users to participate, make decisions about their privacy. And I think the figure you gave me is now 700,000 apps associated with Facebook. I'm not sure there are quite so many for mobile, but how do you situate a consumer in this environment? And we were at another event this morning where we were hearing about 15-page scroll down privacy policies, and where do we begin? And I guess it's from the position of somebody who's in a company that's both an app and a platform. Closer, thank you.
Well, so the role of consumers is really important, and in this particular new economy, and it's in part because of the extraordinary growth of this industry. Really, Liz is exactly right. This industry did not exist even a few years ago. On Facebook, we have 700,000 applications which have already been built, and on Google and Apple, there's 250,000 at least, I think, for each, at least. And this is just with 3 companies, and of course, there's several platforms represented here. We really are talking about an entirely new industry which has been created, and it's happened within just the span of a few years. So, of course, there's a lot for consumers to absorb, but this is driven, I think, by consumer demand. Consumers want to have ubiquitous access to new goods and new services wherever they are. It's exactly right that most people are now encountering the web through their mobile device all over the world. And so, of course, they want to have the best business tools, the best information about their health, abilities to track these things wherever they go. So I don't think we should step away from the fact that this is consumer demand driven, and consumers are getting extraordinary value at either no price on our platform or similar platforms, or for a very limited amount of money.
And I'm assuming for all of you who are platforms, the amount of energy you're putting into either working with app developers or worrying about what to do, that you're getting a lot of value out of this as well. I mean, yeah.
Well, we're not monetizing directly from this,
No, I
but
know you're not,
and so I will only speak for Facebook there, because others are certainly charging and obtaining some direct value. The consumer role is really important, and on Facebook we've tried to do a few things. We've tried to give consumers immediate notice, clear, transparent notice about what's going to happen when they leave Facebook and they initiate an application when they're having a relationship with a third-party company. So when a user voluntarily chooses to have an application launch, they are now presented, and this is in part thanks to our partnership with the Canadians, who have helped us think this through and get better on this. And so, much to their credit, we are giving and presenting a clear pop-up screen that a user sees that begins to explain, you are about to leave Facebook. You are about to go to another company's site. Here is the information which will be pulled from Facebook at your behest in order to provide the good or service or game that you'd like to participate in. Here is the information that is necessary to launch that application and make it function. It also says, after May, when we initiated a new round of additional protections, here is the expected service you should get, and here is exactly the data that this service needs to know about you and your friends before this application launches. And if you do not want this service, or if this user data does not seem appropriate to you, please do not consent at this moment to leave Facebook to go and begin a relationship with that third-party company. So we think it's really important to have consumer notice, have it be clear, have it be transparent, have it be in easily understood language. Consumers, I think, play another role, and that's in playing the role of watchdog. When consumers, after getting that kind of notice from Facebook about their new relationship that they're starting with a third-party company, if they have an experience that is not consistent with the experience that they expected, they can do a couple of things. One, they can report the application to us, and we do get reports all the time, and we take enforcement action based on those reports. We help sever the relationship between the application and the consumer. And then on top of that, we make sure, and I think this is really important, we make sure that consumers have the opportunity to end that relationship in a couple of ways. On Facebook, as of May, we gave people the tools to see what platforms, what applications you have decided to engage with, even if you'd done it several years ago and have now forgotten. We give you an opportunity to view that in a clear dashboard, to turn any of them off, to end that relationship if you'd like, to end any relationship with any application that you'd like.
Is that an emerging practice that's happening across platforms, this sort of just-in-time notice? I mean, you could almost argue that's better notice and information that we've been getting on the web. On the other hand, somebody may be doing that with 20 different apps over the course of, a day, and you sort of wonder. I mean, are you doing similar kinds of...
I think it is. I mean, other platforms are doing similar things with just-in-time notices, whether it's for geolocation or sharing information with apps. But I think that's one part of it, which is the giving clarity to the consumer about what it is they're going to do and what they're going to enter into. I think there's another level down, though, which is we can get into a bit more of what it is the application does, rather than simply expecting the user to make all those decisions. Now, there are a wide range of applications doing many, many different things, but some of the work that we've done with our developers is to start looking a bit further beyond telling the consumer that you're going to do this, you're going to go here, and this is going to be the consequence, to actually taking another step to say, is there another layer of things that we can do to help the consumer actually making sure that what actually happens when they start using the apps that they get from our platform are going to perform in a way that we would want them to do to protect the consumer's privacy. So I think there are a number of things that can be done. I think companies are exploring a range of different things, just-in-time notices. They're beginning to look at how you build applications, guidelines. And if you look across platforms, the approach still today is terms and conditions. You sign up to terms and conditions, you need to comply with the law, and to most developers, they never read that stuff. They move straight on, they do their thing, and they spend very little time thinking about things like privacy. Companies are starting to think about changing that, and they're starting to think, this is not working. There's no point telling the garage developer to comply with the laws of all the countries in the world. Is this available everywhere? You're not going to get the message across. So somehow that has to be translated.
I want to come back to that because you've just let hundreds of thousands of people who are going to monetize and become part of our economy off the hook. So, I want to come back to that in a moment.
I wasn't letting them off the hook, but...
Well, they don't need to know the law. They don't need to...
No, they don't know the law.
Well, they don't know the law.
I'm not saying they shouldn't know the law. They don't know the law, and they're not going to know the law.
And Elizabeth, I don't see very many regulators enforcing the law against applications. We heard this morning that I think South Korea may be going after an application, but are we just basically in an environment where the laws we have right now are not fit for purpose? And we should talk about sort of the privacy laws, but I know for platforms we've got some other laws to worry about too.
Yeah, I think there will be a sea change in the way regulators approach this field, because in the past, really what regulators have done is they have led enforcement actions against the elephants. And from the elephants, there was a trickle-down effect so that the mice would comply, or at least start to understand what their obligations are. But I think today what we're seeing is a lot of the innovations coming from the mice. And so what are data protection commissioners supposed to do here? I think we're going to have to lead enforcement actions against some applications. And you know what? I think that's a good thing, because as we were talking about yesterday, when a data protection commissioner goes deeply down looking at a new business model or a new technology, then it gets people talking, robust dialogue, solutions, and I think that's what we have to do with the application. We have to focus in on some applications led by data protection commissioners, get the reports out there, and there's a lot of other things we can do too, and maybe we get back to that at the end.
We can get back to that, because you also wonder whether there's an incentivizing role down the chain as well as an enforcement role. Miko?
Well, yeah, this incentivizing role is one of my favorite topics. So lately there's been a lot of discussions around the renewal of European Data Protection Directive, and what we hear from the regulators is often that there has to be regulatory incentives, and somehow I always hear that as more penalties, more enforcement, things like that. And if we think about the app economy here and apply data controller type of concepts to it, we find that we end up chasing the mice, and there are elephants in the field as well, but they are not necessarily regulated. So if we think about the device platform, which quite familiar to me, it's not collecting any data. It's just providing technical capabilities. So it's not a data controller in the traditional sense of the word. If we think about the application store, they are not really collecting any data other than those purchase transactions, which is not really the topic of this discussion. So they are not the data controllers in this application sphere either. So what about the people who actually made the code, the guys who can be anywhere? They are probably vendors for some application developers, or then they are just single guys and girls who are capable of doing that. Not necessarily data controllers either, unless the application actually then transmits data to a server, and then you have your data controller, but then it may be in a geographical location that doesn't really use these concepts. So if we want to have a solution, it would need to be some kind of an ecosystem solution where there are basic rules and the responsibilities are somehow assigned so that it makes the whole regime effective, and there would need to be some positive incentives as well. Everyone in that ecosystem would need to be able to rely on the other players' compliance. Although, for example, if the ecosystem would work in a way that it seems to be working, that the platforms are providing notices in a way on behalf of those applications, shouldn't the application developers then be allowed to rely to a certain extent to those notices, and should they be punished if one platform doesn't do it? I don't think it would work that way. That would not be fair. So,
I guess my question also is, if you're providing those notices, you're relying on that the information that you're getting about what it is they're collecting is real. I know there's some confusion about sort of your own liability in all of this, and sort of the traditional notions of intermediary liability. You're not exactly putting content, you're giving them permission to put code. I mean, it's another whole area of law, Section 230, the directive in Europe. But do you feel confident that if you get aggressively involved in managing what the apps are doing, that your sort of liability protections are going to... Does it even apply? Does it fit? Or are we just sort of operating outside of that environment that we're certainly used to doing in Europe, the United States, and Canada? We all have sort of different models for that kind of platform liability.
Well, I'm not at all comfortable. So you're talking about Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the e-commerce directive and things like that.
E-commerce directive, Section 230,
Yeah.
DMCA, all of these things that sort of have a paradigm of who you are as a platform and who the third parties are that are coming on and off.
I think that's a key point. So, we have regulation on laws that give you safe harbor.
Right.
You are allowed to avoid a responsibility for content that you are not really playing with. You don't moderate it and everything. Yet it seems like part of the industry activities is about moderating applications, for example, before they enter the...
You're being encouraged. Canada came directly to Facebook and said, do more.
Yeah. So this is a prime example of their
Which
maybe...
you should be doing, but...
Yeah. But the regulation doesn't really encourage.
Fit to allow you to be an aggressive host and not become somehow part of the problem, the legal problem. Do you, Stephen?
I agree with Mikko. The regulation doesn't encourage and doesn't create the right incentives for companies to do the right thing. Certainly from my company's perspective, there hasn't been too much of a disincentive. When we need to respond and take stuff down, apps that do bad things, we do it. We don't find there are too many consequences. And this may be a slight difference between American attitudes to notice and take down and European attitudes.
Well, we only have it for copyright, so we're not quite in the same.
But European attitudes tend to be much more laissez-faire about if it's got any kind of slightly dodgy thing about it, just take it down.
We don't do that.
That tends to be the practice. So for us, but from an economic perspective, we want an open, vibrant environment. We don't want to regulate these people. Regulate every single aspect of what they're doing. At the same time, we have to kind of create standards, and we have to kind of create the right environment for our customers. So the challenge is to create be specific about what it is you're going to react to, and therefore you have to be very clear. What are your requirements? What do you expect people to do? We're not just exercising our kind of corporate discretion. We need to have some kind of clear set of standards. We can say to developers, that's what you're meant to do. If you don't do it, we're going to react. And if we get complaints about those things, then we're going to react. And that's the way we've approached it. So for apps on our platform, we preview them against standard requirements, and then if they don't meet those requirements, they will come down, and we have a notice and reporting abuse process as similar to the Facebook process, where our customers can and do report, and we respond and take it down.
So, Tim, let me ask a little bit about sort of, everybody the last year has been a time where people have sharpened their guidelines. Facebook certainly has, on your own and with the help of Canada, but you definitely have gotten there. You've had sort of requirements for platforms longer than some other people about location, and you've got security. Should we really simply be relying on the users for enforcement? I mean, I think there's this weird balance here where on the front end, everybody's getting a little bit better, but 700,000 apps, I mean, when we start to talk about enforcement against these apps as a platform, what's really realistic to expect? And I think Facebook probably has the biggest problem because it has the biggest wealth of apps. I mean, just, the biggest uptake, and that's a valuable asset, and that's why I'm on Facebook. But it just seems like it's an enforcement nightmare, and that on one hand, you're sort of creating an expectation as all the platforms get better and more savvy and have guidelines and have rules, that somehow there's some monitoring, auditing, something else going on. But I don't think it is, right?
So I really think there's a role for everyone within the ecosystem to play. Certainly governments around the world have a role to play in finding bad apps, or when they're told about a bad app, taking action either against that application or anybody who is violating that app by violating consumers' trust by taking data from that application. I mean, there's no question that governments have a role to play. Certainly, platforms have a role to play. They have a role in setting clear expectations in legal terms of service. They have a role to play in including a series of pre-review, if possible, enforcement actions, continuous monitoring, as we do. We do a whole series of ongoing monitoring steps. Consumers, as I talked about at the beginning.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about that?
Sure.
So is it like random monitoring, or I mean, how are you doing this?
So,
to the extent it's public.
We do things to try to target the greatest volume of the applications. So every month, for example, one of the things we do, just one in a list of them, is that we look at the top 500 applications on our system, and we have random checks.
But those were the guys taking the IDs,
right?
But
well. Taking. I'm not sure that's been shown yet.
I mean, whatever it was, I understand it was probably security, not an intentional. But this is harder than.
Oh, it's real hard.
It's really hard.
And we're learning as we're going along, and I think that's the important point here, is that this is evolving, and so are the platforms, so is the ecosystem. I have found recently that just as with every new technology, there are going to be people who are trying to exploit it inappropriately. This is also the case about this new industry. And it's, again, a small percentage of a very large, very responsible industry, but there will be people who will try to take advantage of that ecosystem. So as a platform, I think it's important that we engage in trusting, but trying to verify when possible. So for example, the 500 applications that we look at really quite routinely are those that are producing 50% of the volume of application use for Facebook platform. Mm-hmm. But that's just one of the steps. We have a series of algorithmic or automated checks. The algorithmic checks are looking to see if something is unusual or unexpected that's happening, a spike in growth, something that looks like that it could be a spamming of users. And those oftentimes trigger automatic enforcement actions. We sometimes sever the ability for the application to come and pull data in real time. We put a pause on that. If an application is beginning to pull data at an unexpectedly fast rate, we have a limiter which will reduce their ability to do so. And I don't think this is unusual, but it's a series of additional steps that we put in place. And these are, again, just two of I could speak of a dozen of them, where we're engaging in an ongoing process of helping ensure that consumers are having the experience that they want with this third party that they've requested to have. But really, again, the question has got to be, who can help identify those bad apps? Our consumers do it. We do it because we see when some bad action is taking place, and we report it. We report it regularly to
who?
Well, certainly in the United States to the FTC.
So you are.
Yeah,
because my next question
and we
was,
will continue to do so.
Yeah, my next question was, I'm listening to the sophistication of sort of how you're identifying these apps and algorithms, and then I'm thinking about the regulators, and I'm thinking, Are you ever going to be able, sort of independently, as a regulators, to identify bad apps? I mean, how you want to jump in there?
Ask a question, which is, what is a bad app?
Well,
Let's have that conversation.
That's exactly a problem. First of all, the industry doesn't have standards right now on what a bad app is. You have your own ideas about what a bad app is, but don't forget, again, we're talking about applications that are, have global reach. They're collecting personal information across the globe. There are data protection laws that they are subject to, so the law is there. And I think what's happened is we just haven't had an example of the application of a data protection law to an app developer and a real deep look at that. And I would like to see industry. What's the barrier to industry getting together and developing some standards around each of these players? Or maybe there are a series of standards.
Stephen? Maybe to talk a little bit about what mobile's doing.
Exactly. So that's exactly the point I think is the problem. And going back to your earlier comment about the elephants and the mice, absolutely, regulators can take action against the mice. You can only pick off one or two. And the laws are all different. And most of the developers will be in India or in China or somewhere else. So you're never going to get them. You regulators through traditional methods of regulating where we effectively see the world as kind of flat. So there's the regulators and the regulated. And actually it's not as simple as that. It's multi-tiered. You've got a whole range of different players in this ecosystem. Big platforms, networks, big kind of elephants, if you like, and then all the little mice. And completely contrary to much of what's been talked about in this conference, which you might think that the internet consists of just two companies, we're at the other end of the scale here. We're trying, all of us are trying to create a world where we completely open up the possibility for innovation. There will be millions of developers all over the world. You can develop your own apps rather than relying upon someone else to create it for you. In that world, how does a regulator regulate that type of problem? We're moving out of legal regulation into kind of social policy. So you need another approach. You need to recognize that, first of all, you have to articulate what it is you expect to happen, these standards. And that is something that all stakeholders have to do, the companies and the regulators and the civil society representatives. And then find ways of articulating that and expressing that so that the developers, this mass of innovative individuals, can begin to have common standards. And another point is we don't want to have fragmentation, because fragmentation is a bad thing for a developer. They can only cope with a certain amount of complexity. So we need consistency. And that consistency has to be global. It's a global environment. There's no point having rules for Canada and different rules for Italy and different rules for the UK. Developers cannot cope with that. So we're going to have to think differently about regulation and think about articulating something which is common. It may look different to what we do today. It may not reflect geographic distributions of regulatory requirements, but that's the approach we need to work towards. And that's something that my company's been exploring with other companies in the mobile space to get all the mobile industry together to create a common framework where all the stakeholders can come together, articulate, taking internationally recognized principles, the OECD principles, the data protection principles in Europe and so on and so forth, and then articulating that for given contexts so that we can all agree that there are common things we expect, privacy outcomes for our users in different contexts. What we don't want to have is, Vodafone doing one thing and Orange doing another thing, Apple doing something else. We'd like to see consistency, and we think that it's something we can possibly achieve. And if we can achieve it, as the big elephants, if the elephants can achieve that, then we can really have an impact on that millions of developers out there.
But you've got a framework to work from, because you have the OECD guidelines. You can work with some regulators on the development of those industry standards for mobile. It can be done. The accountability framework is another framework to look at. So it can be done, but you're not going to get away from the fact that there are differences in the law.
Yes, Miko.
Just some comments here. So I think that's a worthy goal, what you just pointed there. And that's the beginning. It's the piece of the puzzle. So as all of you actually pointed out, there needs to be a role for every player in the ecosystem. The foundation needs to be based on commonly accepted principles that are designed for that particular ecosystem alone. But then that's not all there is to it. So So different platforms are different. So for example, that kind of like cloud type of a platform that Facebook is running, you can do a lot in terms of monitoring traffic and things like that, and then do reactions. Whereas the kind of like the operating system level, mobile device level platforms are completely different. So we don't know anything about the traffic that takes place on that device once it leaves the factory. So they are different. So mobile platforms are more about access control. They will never
Security?
And security in a way, kind of like now something is trying to access your location data and maybe trying to send it away. But that's almost as far as the platform can, the mobile platform can go at this point. P3P, maybe something like that would be the solution to bring some context into those notices. But we know that we are not there yet. Of course, then that would be a solution. But there's a role for everyone. So the platforms there needs to be a technology solution that enforces what it can reasonably enforce. Reporting, I think, is a key part of it, and reacting to those reports and learning from them, and also engaging with the developer community. We need to build a culture of privacy. This is very, very difficult, and it takes a lot of work and who knows how much time. We have to have the basis. We have to. What is culture? You repeat your actions consistently over time. And to do that, you need to have a certain set of clear, actionable principles. So that's where it all starts from.
I guess that's a bit of the concern here is, sort of where are the apps? Because, we start to see the, obviously the mobile, right, it's not Elijah, it's the apps. Maybe it's also the consumer, but I'll stand in for the consumer here. You could ask the question. That we bring those people we can find, which are mostly the elephants, to the table, and we start to work our way through what are some really complex issues. And in mobile, where we're talking about by the time we get to the app, the number of layers underneath. But I am concerned that sort of the platforms do the right thing, and ultimately maybe we're enabling the ignorance of the apps, and they're sort of plug and play. If you're going to be a good app, you build in this code, you do this, you do that, and we don't get either sort of a transfer of privacy values, any sense to actually know what the law is, or that sort of part of what they're supposed to be doing is caring about their consumers, and so I'm kind of worried if we start this process and we don't have at least some of those big apps at the table, and that they're sort of part of this solution. That we're going to have good rules by elephants, and we may even have compliance by mice, but we won't have sort of a changed culture.
Maybe we have to use the grown-up mice and bring the grown-up mice to the table to have this discussion. I was going to say rats, but no one say that.
No.
The grown-up mice need to
We're
be at the
going to
table
start with
with
most
us.
of these are socially valuable,
Yeah.
so and work backwards.
But you can't have innovation without accountability, and so and that's that's the goal there.
So how are the mice going to wake up in the morning and be like all of these companies? I mean, they're not going to have chief privacy officers unless, maybe you get to a Farmville level and you're that kind of a company. But how are we going to get them in, all this work on accountability? We really don't want the guy in the garage to have to hire a chief privacy officer or a lawyer, but we do want them to think differently.
So I agree. There are some big mice, and the big mice have enough resources to listen and understand this and understand their legal responsibilities. But going back to Mikko's point, it is a key thing. Is this? We need to kind of move from regulation by rules to actually regulation by rules as well, but also thinking about this culture of privacy. So one doesn't replace the other; it complements the two. The garage developer is never ever going to come into that conversation. So do you just say, well, hands up, it's too difficult, or do you do something else? And the something else is that the elephants and the big mice, the gatekeepers, if you like, can use their influence to create that culture. Again, pick up on what Mikko said, culture is created by kind of repetition. if you've got multiple organizations all saying slightly different things, addressing problems in different ways, you don't create culture. You create fragmentation and confusion. The ecosystem co-evolving in one direction is what we need to do. The elephants, the big players who have influence, they are the key gateway for this mass of developers to reach the consumer. They have a responsibility, but if you like, the primary target is the developers, the guy who's using their innovative creativity to create wonderful applications for consumers. So there's a layered approach, and I think you can use that, use the energy of this environment to create those kind of outcomes.
Tim?
I'm liking this animal menagerie that we're building, so let me add to it. So there are
Why don't we call it an arc?
Right, maybe, exactly. It's a good idea. So there are vultures, right? The vultures aren't part of the system. They're people who come and take data.
I was about to ask about the vultures.
From the good mice, right? And they come and do things that defy consumer expectations. So the government regulators have to be the hunters who shoot the vultures, right? And there has to be that opportunity.
Don't we want to make the
we don't have
regulators an animal too, so that we can kill them? What do you want to be? Lion. Hawks. Vultures versus hawks? Who wins? Sharks. Oh. Well, we said we were going to do an American-style rude panel and not, but I didn't know it was going to be
Notice
that
I mentioned
rude.
a gun right away.
No,
Yeah.
I know.
Remember, we don't
didn't
have
go to the
guns in Canada.
Go.
Well, one thing about the internet is that you have everything there as you have in your normal society, and all of our societies are, there's all kinds of crime happening. That's the thing that's going to happen in this environment as well. So we should not get too upset about the fact that there will be bad applications. We need to have reactive measures. We need to have people and organizations who enforce against them, and then the civil society, the app ecosystem in this context who wants to act responsibly. They do their share by having platform security, moderating applications when that's possible, and all that. And in the meanwhile, at least Nokia is all for having this kind of like open platform. So we want it to be as possible, as easy as possible to introduce applications to our platforms, and we don't control our distribution channels in that sense. So anyone can set up an application store to sell applications for that work in Nokia devices. So the only thing that we can do is to make sure that we all do our share in a harmonized, consistent manner, as Stephen has been advocating as well.
So let me just ask a final question, because I want to just sort of turn the last part of this into a broader discussion. How much are privacy-enhancing technologies? I mean, obviously, we've got like, Locachino, some of these sort of things that are coming out, and then obviously Facebook has spent a lot of time in the last year on the privacy controls generally, but last week on, literally sort of an apps manager. I mean, what's the promise here, or is it just another thing we're expecting consumers to sort of take the burden on here? And is this going to be just a lot harder in the mobile environment? So that's a big question. But, you want to start?
Yeah. So we start from the premise that user control is really what we should be about. We should be empowering user control over their data, no matter where it is and where it goes. And if we do that, we will have achieved much of the spirit of the privacy laws around the world. And I think that's where we're trying to get to, at least at Facebook. And I think from many of the major platforms are going in that same direction.
So what's the uptake on, I mean, obviously the apps controls are brand new. So
they are.
So I'm not going to ask you how many people are using the apps controls, but how many people are using the controls, the ones we have now?
So
we won't talk about the ones from last December.
I think we've seen enormous interest from people in reviewing what applications they have initiated and launched. I think there's a good bit of uptake and awareness about this ability to view the applications that you've initiated a relationship with on the Facebook platform. And as Leslie was sort of just mentioning, just 2 weeks ago we launched a sort of dashboard where a user can get a sense of exactly what data fields are being requested from Facebook by a third party on their behalf for this
Tim,
application.
can I see that when I'm on mobile? How much of this stuff can I do on mobile? Because, I mean, I'm a user, and then I've come to mobile. And I have to admit, it's taken me a long time to figure out how to log out on mobile, whereas I'm a sort of a power user of privacy controls. But how much of this, which is probably, which is kind of odd, when you get it right, you can use it. But as, you're also an app for me, and I'm finding that much different.
So I think about Facebook in this way, in that while many people who are using Facebook are encountering it through their mobile device, they also are interfacing through a true computer screen. So that is where we have driven much of this. And I think these tools are easier to use, no doubt, from a computer rather than from a mobile device.
But isn't the challenge, I guess, this morning at another mobile event, we were talking about where the next 10 million, 100 million people coming online. I mean, you guys are staking your business on this. People are never going to see a desktop. They're never going to see the traditional web. Where are we on tools when we really start talking about the web? Except, I mean, we do have these notices. We do have some of these. I mean, when we're talking about mobile, does it have the same promise, or are we just like a lot farther behind on what we can do?
Well, I think there's maybe an element of being behind in some areas and maybe an element of being far ahead in other areas.
Explain.
So I think the keywords maybe are like no hidden data collection or no unwanted data collection, and to me everything kind of like evolves around that. So it's about transparency, choice, but also of course safeguards and no secondary use of data unless that was somehow disclosed.
But you can't control the vultures.
No, you can't really. You can control them to a certain extent, but in an open environment, it's difficult. But one thing that we for sure want to avoid is having a user experience that is all about clicking through all kinds of notices.
Right.
So many applications will rely on use of or different kinds of capabilities, and they will use them, differently in different contexts. So if the user will be forced to click through, all kinds of acceptance procedures just in time, all the time, that probably is not workable. But you need to have those controls there and maybe allow users to exercise control over controls. So, define their own settings. Of course, this comes back to the privacy by default, so the default settings would need to be fair. It takes a certain amount of thinking what those
I don't even
are.
know how to set my browser privacy when I'm on. I mean, maybe I can, but it's never sort of occurred to me. So we're taking a lot of tools that, we haven't necessarily gotten people to understand in the web world. So I guess this is still an area ripe for development.
Can I just make one other observation about your point about how do we kind of get more design and pets and privacy by design in this? I think if you can begin to create the requirements for common standards around app development and the way apps are used and the way app developers provide their services, and make sure that's not fragmented, then you're going to create the incentive for someone to come along with your solution. And there are companies doing this, and capital is moving into these companies coming up with interesting solutions. You don't have to regulate for that. You create the conditions and the incentives, it will happen. And obviously we should encourage that, and we shouldn't try and regulate beyond what is necessary. Let's let the market...
So bringing the industry together so that people actually sort of know what the rules and standards are going to be for apps. We're going to be driving a third-party market that's going to be very... Okay.
Well, the laws are outcome-based, so what you want to do is keep the laws at that level and the regulation at that level, and let the industry standards and the incentives and the development work towards the solution.
All right, folks, we're going to open it up. Identify your animal and your question, please. Good. Thank you, Omer. You can take my glasses off.
Hello.
Good. Now I can sit here and tell you to hold up your microphone. Would you like mine?
No, I can do this without a microphone, if it's okay. It's not by coincidence that chair next to Leslie is vacant today, and I can tell you that as conference organizers, we tried very hard to get an app developer to sit in that chair. And this includes both very large companies that have become almost household names to some smaller ones, and in the US and Europe and even in Israel. And yet, the seat remains vacant. So, I feel insecure about this.
Personally insecure?
No, as a user,
Should we walk outside?
As a user, because this obviously, is a loophole the size of the Eurotunnel, basically, and privacy and data security practices of the platforms. So I want to bring it back to the accountability or liability structure here, and maybe ask the regulator or some of the platform providers, if you think that monitoring randomly some of the 500 top apps out of 700,000 is sufficient in this respect. And you mentioned the liability schemes for intermediaries and content provision, so Section 230 of the CDA or the DMCA, and I'm not sure that the analogy is right here, because there, you provide some content, you basically certify whether it's violating the law or not, and that's very difficult, but here you're actually letting someone use, and have access to some of your customers' data. So
that really is the difference than just putting the information on your site. So
right. So it's more like a data
transfer. Just giving technical permissions. The truth is, you're doing more.
Yeah.
Much more. You're opening the warehouse,
content.
basically.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So again, I want to ask, because I think eventually this might backfire on the industry and on the platform providers, which might get some liability.
Well, maybe need to clarify it. So what I said about the responsibilities related to the regulatory environment today. So despite there not being any incentives for many of the players to comply, regulatory incentives, we are doing a lot. For example, Nokia created the platform security model already 2004, before there was really an application ecosystem. And now we are looking into it in our next operating systems. So I think everybody recognizes the need for industry to act responsibly. But we also need to be cautious of the fact that the regulation does not necessarily apply entirely nicely into this ecosystem, and therefore there needs to be room for new kind of thinking, as Stephen has been pointing out. And it's probably, I guess self-regulation is a bit of a word that's not supposed to be used, but something like that needs to take place.
Co-regulation.
Yeah. Co-regulation, there needs to be some credit and in participating in these environments.
Can I just add very briefly?
You can.
Omer, I'll be really brief. I did not mean to suggest this was the only review mechanism. It's only one of a dozen. We do ongoing review of the amount of data that's being pulled. We do consistent monitoring across the entire platform of the 700,000 applications. So we see in real time what's happening. When something looks awkward or unusual or unexpected, that's another one of the sets of triggers. So that what I'm saying is there's a multi-layered internal review process that's taking place.
It's not only what they pull, it's how they use it, which has become...
And that's where we, as a platform, may not have the ability to see what's happening. And I think you correctly identify that there is a blind spot several steps removed from the platform where we can't see unexpected uses. That's where, in part, our consumers do us a great service, right? If they have an experience which is unexpected, which does not meet their expectations from that application, they, at least on our platform, and it sounds like on several of the other platforms, have the ability to report that so that we can take action, so that a regulator can take action. I think all hope is not lost. I think there's actually really good stuff that's happening.
It's another chair, and it's also, and they too are never at these conferences or.
Yeah, and just about this, I mean, consumers don't know anything, right? I mean, they know how their data are being used.
All right, let's go back there.
Yeah, I want to add to this last point. I think that the number one thing in privacy protection is the awareness and the fact that most users are not even aware of how their privacy is being compromised all the time. And that's either by the platform or by the applications. And it sounds to me like the simplest thing, at least in terms of the regulator, is to make sure that every application and platform provider announces the type of information that it gathers and passes and how it's being used. And then you would have a lot of eyes over the world looking at this data and making sure if there is a privacy breach or not. And I think these are the eyes that need to look at it, and I don't think we can trust the platform people to do that. Their commercial incentive is obviously to have as much as applications as possible, and as long as people are happy, then they just want a bigger number. And I think that's probably the approach that we should take. But I want to hear the
You guys want to respond to that? And then I think we're 1 and 2 and wow, 3, 4, 5. Yikes! You're 2. I know. Well, we've got 15 minutes. That's why I stopped early. Do you have a response quickly? Yeah.
I completely agree. Awareness is clearly a part of this, creating the culture of privacy, where the consumer is as much a part of that as the application developer, as the platform. And yes, we should do everything we can to make that better. And there's things that the platforms and the big elephants can do to help that.
Okay, is that also a regulator regulator role on the
Because one point?
Yeah,
but awareness is not helped. I don't know how many apps you have on your smartphone. I assume you have a smartphone, but I don't know how many apps you're running. If you're running 50 apps, maybe, if every one of them is saying a different thing in different ways, they may be completely transparent. It's complete gobbledygook to you because everyone is completely different. And how you control your app, how you control your information, how you read it, these are all different. Is that helping you as a consumer? So, I mean, the point about awareness is...
The application would say that it gathers my geolocation...
in order to serve me better.
My social network and pass it on to third party, then yeah, that would certainly help me, and that would certainly help others that maybe know more about it to raise awareness.
So sort of the watchdogs, if it was at that level of...
Exactly, and I think that's the only...
Which they should be saying under, I mean, if they're saying something different, then they are violating everybody's law, but yeah.
Can I just come back? But leaving aside words and how it's expressed to you, if you're looking at things like control, because that's an equally important part of it, if every application is controlled in a different way, you're never going to get the learning. People are never going to learn this stuff. There's only so much we can absorb as consumers. We can't even read privacy policies, let alone learn the different controls for every single app. Our view is that there should be an attempt to try and create a commonality around some of these experiences. Not to regulate it, but to help you as the consumer more or less know how to control your apps and try and encourage application developers to approach these issues in much the same way.
I think that the subset is very small for most of the applications and that it's very clear, and it's certainly a lot better than telling you are leaving our platform domain to some third party. We now have no legal responsibility, and usually it's an 8-year-old kid clicking away to...
It's Nicole. It's Nicole. Jules?
Look,
I think you
like,
were next. I see you back there, but I'm over here next. So.
Look, I don't want anyone to be dissuaded about the value. The most useful thing I think that has happened in the app control world, probably the two most useful things are the Facebook showing me what data my apps are getting more discreetly, and my iPhone showing me who's getting my location. Not necessarily because the average user is controlling it, but it forces some of the apps who might have just cavalierly taken whatever they're going to take to recognize that they may be spooking some people, and why. And frankly, it's a little confusing. There's some data they do need, and users don't understand why they do need it. So I don't want to dissuade that, and I hope more will do that. But I want to tweak a little bit something that was said a bit earlier, and Omar and I, tried to reach out to app developers, but I think it's fairly naive for us to think that when the industry took about 15 years to come together with behavioral advertising rules, which are still different in the US and Europe, and the regulators are still not sure if they're good enough, and that's with 15 billion companies and 8,000 CPOs, all who've been sitting here at these meetings for 10 years. If we think that the app developers day one of their existence, which this, more or less is what, 2 years, 3 years, are going to, forget sitting up there. They're not in this room. There's probably somebody somewhere, right?
Do we have an app developer?
Right? This is the app developer session. Do we have anyone who's written an app and sold it, right? So in a couple of years, they're going to show up, and in 5 years, we'll have someone at the table. I think one person who
I
works...
don't think we have the time, Jules.
Right.
I'm unwilling
So-
to believe because it
right.
took 15 years to
Right.
get this.
So my
that we
answer
can't-
is, let's not expect that they're going to quickly fix the problem for themselves, nor that we completely will force it by being a choke point, but let's get the resources out there for those folks who are grabbing what they can grab. They grab code and they make mistakes and they use it. Let's at least give them the privacy policy generators, the big websites all figured out privacy pretty quickly. The billions of bloggers grabbed it from everyone else and copied everyone else's privacy policy and, wanted to do what was right in an easy way. So we need
They
to
actually have to follow it.
Right. Well, look, but let's get them the resources out there so that the guy who's lazy and just wants to get his thing done can at least grab some good stuff, can get some, reasonable guidance, can get some of the content that we could probably find and that's starting to be out there, and let's get it out there for them to see and to use and, make it theirs.
No, it is better with the mic.
Okay, this is for Tim. First of all, thank you for being here today, and thank you for being honest.
You're
in
welcome.
your
Thank you
answers.
for having me.
And it goes back to Leslie's question. My concern being in the mobile space is that much of the thinking, whether it's from policy, regulators, others, is based on fixed desktop experiences. Going back to Leslie's question about the mobile, given that according to your own stats, more people are accessing Facebook from the mobile and spending more time on Facebook from the mobile, it's on some of your pages and it's been reported before, and I've got it here and I like it. But I can't control my settings from this. There's no icon here that says privacy, blah, blah, blah. Are you going to do anything about that? Are you going to give me the tool, very simply as you've done here, you've simplified it, it's much easier on this device. Does Facebook plan to give me the tool to understand the privacy implications of my use of Facebook and what other third-party apps might be accessing my Facebook data integrated into it?
It's a great question. We're in an innovation stage. Our mobile usage has actually not even begun until January of 2009. So that's even younger than the app industry as a whole. So we will get there, I hope. And I think that consumer demand will drive us there. But this is not just a Facebook problem. This is a smartphone problem, and Facebook is one of the entities which will have to wrestle with this. That's.
Can I respond?
You can respond quickly. I've got very restless animals over here.
A huge mammoth, and you're leading in this area. Do you think there's some responsibility to help bring this? I mean, you've got this tool. Why not just put it on that device? Why not make it easy for those 600 million users?
So I think that privacy innovation is one of our hallmarks at Facebook. We are constantly pushing out really important, innovative new tools to give people user control. I think it's a fabulous idea. And I don't know that we've wrestled with it internally, but I appreciate the suggestion.
If you use a mobile browser, they're all available across.
Right.
Yeah, if you just stick the app up, right now, a lot of us are not coming for the first time through the app. So, but it's certainly where it's heading. Okay.
I have it here. My thinking may be contaminated by European law, but the way I see it is that the ones calling the shots here in terms of the use of information would be the app, let's call them app owners, all right? But of course, what we've seen, and I think everybody agrees, the app owners will include the sort of big app owners. You refer to Google Maps, Facebook, Weather Channel, one end of the scale. At the other end of the scale, maybe not today, but tomorrow we'll have the local bakery that will tell me through the app when the fresh loaf is ready to collect, right? So because of this wide range of app owners, and we are here today, would you say that the role of the main role today of the platform providers would be to devise the right set of standards in cooperation perhaps with at least progressive regulators for that whole range of app owners to follow amid? Is that a fair duty on the platform providers, or is it too onerous?
Well, I'm not answering that question.
Yeah, I think it's a fair duty, and that's really what we've been talking about. Is the duty that the platform has is different to the duty that say European law would ascribe, because we're not talking about, as Mika said earlier, data controllers. We're talking about platforms that have capabilities that others then use. So there's a different type of obligation, and I think that's fine. It's not the traditional data protection type of obligation. That really rests with the baker. How do you get the baker to do the right thing? And the platform has a role to do that, and I think the platform needs to do many of the things that Facebook have described, great things that platforms can build in, as well as helping educate and create standards for the application to ensure that they're doing the right thing.
Fran, you've been waiting.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Miko wants to respond.
No, I think Stephen covered it. So I think at least everyone in this panel agrees that these standards need to be developed, and the work has started. There's a lot of activity in the area. It needs to come together. Needs to come to some conclusions that are actually implementable. And then, of course, that work cannot take place without inviting at least the developers who want to be participating in it. Otherwise, it's like paternalism, and we don't want to do that either. But definitely, it's not too onerous. I don't think so.
Yeah, what I was going to bring up is in 2005, do we remember the names Claria and Gator? There were a lot of issues with adware and spyware. And that actually resulted in a situation where, in the end, there was no business model for these companies because they were abusing the rights of people's privacy and taking over their computers. We have an opportunity to avoid that, and I think there are some lessons learned from that situation. There were some technology solutions, there were some legal solutions, there were some standards that were developed, and basically Google and Yahoo and AOL and others said, we're going to not accept, at least not as quickly, apps who don't live up to the standards, and Trustee was part of this overall process. So, again, it does make sense in something like this to have a standard that's outside of the platforms because it's easier for the developers, it provides the right incentives. I think the platforms can incentivize positively that good apps get higher placement, more notice, things like that. And then if you have a focus on finding the good apps or identifying the good apps, it's easier for regulators and law enforcement to identify the ones that are outside the norms. So we've been here before. I think there's solutions that can happen. I think it's time to get started.
Pass it up.
Thanks.
This side of the room is just taking over. I keep looking to try to create some balance, but...
Hi. It's just there's just a couple of things that I just want to throw out there for people to think about. That it's important to represent that there's not a one-size-fits-all on application developers. Some of them are stay-at-home moms, some of them are university students, some of them are big companies. There's a range. And so there's imperfect information, just like there's imperfect execution. So that's a challenge for everyone. The second thing is, let's not forget when we're talking about how we want certain people who are involved in platforms, etc., to decide what kind of barriers they want to have to participate in a site, that competition law also has a lot to do with informing us about what the limits of the restrictions that you can put on here. So it's not just people who are talking about information, it's also talking about how the market competes. So that's an important issue too. And this is a place where regulators can actually be very helpful by saying that they want to encourage the creation of standards or at least discussion about that. And to that extent, regulators have been reasonably silent, and they could be very helpful.
That's a very, very interesting point. Do I have anybody else before I go back to Omer for the closing wisdom. Oh, can't quite do the closing wisdom yet.
So one analogy I thought about, that if I'm boarding a plane, and no one is telling me that now I'm entering a relationship with all the other passengers in the airplane. By the way, the word relationship is I never heard it in this context, because I thought the only relationship I had with my wife, and even there I have some issues, privacy issues, and now I have a relationship with different applications, so scary. Anyway.
Relationship management, is that what we're really talking about here?
So anyway, so I have, no one's telling me that I have a relationship now with all the other third-party passengers in the airplane, and if one of them decides to punch me in the face, then they are personally liable, and the airline company or the airport is not liable for that. So I think that we're taking. So I think we're taking the responsibility and liability far away from the platforms. Essentially, it doesn't matter who wrote the software; it's running on your hardware, on your platforms. So it's definitely your responsibility. And we should also ask the question: who is profiting from this? And it's also the platforms and the. So they should be accountable.
So there. Well, I think I heard you say that you agreed with that generally. I'm not sure we're talking about that you agreed that you should be legally accountable, but I think I heard you say that it's in everybody's interest for you to take the responsibility to setting the standards and
to take the responsibility in being very active in solving the puzzle. I think that's the key. And just to reaction to that, so we can't say that platforms are this and that, because there are different types of platforms. You know, in a way, Facebook is an application, but it's an application that is a platform for new applications from a mobile device platform's perspective or from the web perspective. So it's not as simple as that, as saying that platforms should do this and that. Different platforms do different things. They play a different role in that ecosystem, and their responsibilities need to be assigned according to the role and the possibilities. Of course, there needs to be room for improvements, no doubt, but there are still limitations. Nobody has the silver bullet. It's not the platform should do it, or only the application should do it, or only the application store should do it. Everyone plays a part in it.
Anybody else want to comment? And then, do you have a last comment?
Well, I don't want to summarize, but I just want to.
I don't mind having a co-moderator.
I just want to say that I'm not sure I like Jules' idea. I mean, I like it because Jules raised it, but I think an off-the-shelf privacy policy here is not the best of solutions. And what I'm waiting to hear here is where's the stick? I think there's got to be a stick here somewhere. And I'm interested what Liz thinks. Who's going to be the culprit? I mean, who are you going to go after? And I know that you had this big review of Facebook, but that yielded. I think the result after the second round was that things are pretty much okay, and then the Wall Street Journal blew it up again last week. So back to the regulators.
I'll respond to that.
Please.
Yeah, I think the most valuable contribution that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada made in the Facebook investigation round one was the detailed explanation of what actually happens with user information in a social networking site, which seemed to be a revelation to much of the public. It was widely reported through the media globally, and I think that really adds to user education.
Our time is up. I want to thank our panelists very much. I think we have done a very good job of framing the questions, and that we're really just at the beginning of the solutions. I hope if we do that again, that this seat is taken. And that maybe we'll be further along in what I think is a very, very heavy lifting, which is how we start to get, given the fact that we don't have a single type of platform, some beginning of agreement about sort of what the rules ought to be at each level of the ecosystem. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.